One of the most painful questions a person can ask after a breakup is this: why was I so attracted to someone who was clearly wrong for me? The question often appears months or even years after the relationship has ended. The emotional intensity has faded and the longing has softened. For the first time, there is enough distance to see things a little bit more clearly. And looking back, many people realized that the warning signs were present from the very beginning. The emotional unavailability was there. The inconsistency was there. The tendency to withdraw, to avoid intimacy, to create confusion, all of that was visible. And yet, none of that reduced the attraction. If anything, it seemed to intensify it. So what is happening? One possible answer comes from a concept introduced by Sigmund Freud called repetition compulsion or compulsive repetition. Freud observed something strange about human beings. Rather than avoiding painful emotional experiences, people often recreate them. They find themselves leading variations of the same story over and over and over again, even when that story causes suffering. Repetition compulsion is the unconscious tendency to repeat emotional or relational patterns that were originally shaped by unresolved trauma, even when they cause distress. It is the psyche's attempt to make sense of experiences that were never fully processed or integrated. Someone who felt emotionally abandoned may become obsessed with unavailable partners. Someone raised in an unpredictable household may unconsciously recreate relationships filled with uncertainty and emotional chaos. A child who grew up with emotional neglect or inconsistent caregiving may later in life repeatedly find themselves in relationships where emotional closeness is unstable. Partners who are distant, unpredictable, or hard to reach. On the surface, this can look like bad choices, but psychologically it often reflects an unconscious pull toward familiar emotional dynamics. There is frequently an implicit hope running underneath the pattern. If I can just get it right this time, the ending will be different. From a trauma perspective, one key idea is that traumatic memories are often not stored in the brain like ordinary autobiographical stories. Instead of being organized into a coherent narrative with a clear beginning, middle, and end, they're often stored in a fragmented form. This means the experience is encoded in pieces, sensory impressions, for example, sounds, images, body sensations, or emotional states like fear, shame, panic, and then implicit relational expectations like I'm not safe, I will be abandoned, rather than as a verbally accessible, ordered memory. And because these fragments are not fully integrated into a narrative, they are not experienced as past in the usual sense. Instead, they can remain emotionally active and easily triggered. This is why trauma survivors often experience sudden emotional states, bodily reactions, or relational fears that feel as if they come out of nowhere, even when there is no obvious current danger. The memory is not remembered, it is relived in fragments. This fragmentation also helps explain the repetition compulsion. The mind has a natural drive towards making sense of incomplete experiences. When a traumatic memory has never been fully organized into a coherent story, the psyche may unconsciously attempt to reconstruct it through new relational situations. In other words, the person may find themselves drawn to patterns that resemble the original emotional wound because the mind is trying to complete the story. The unconscious hope is not simply to repeat the past, but to finally create a version of it that ends differently, where there is understanding, agency, and repair. In this way, repetition is less about self-sabotage and more about an unfinished psychological process. Fragmented experiences repeatedly push upward into awareness, and the psyche tries to bind them together into something coherent. Until that integration happens, the person may continue to encounter similar emotional dynamics as if the mind is repeatedly asking, can this time this story be made whole and brought to a close? Imagine a child who spends years trying to earn the affection of a distant parent. The child becomes attentive, accommodating, helpful, successful, anything that might finally secure the love they desperately crave. Yet, despite all the efforts, something remains missing. The emotional need is never fully met. So what happens to that longing? It does not simply disappear. The child grows up, but the emotional memory remains alive within the nervous system. And years later, they meet someone who feels strangely familiar. The person is emotionally distant, difficult to read, and their affection arrives inconsistently. Sometimes they seem interested, sometimes they disappear, and sometimes they move closer, sometimes they pull away. And suddenly, attraction appears, chemistry, longing, obsession. The psyche repeatedly returns to the wound because some part of it hopes that this time the outcome will be different. This time, perhaps, the unavailable person will finally choose me, and this time, perhaps, I will finally be enough. What makes this process so tragic is that the unconscious mind struggles to distinguish between healing a wound and reenacting it. As a result, people often find themselves trapped in relationships that feel profoundly important while simultaneously causing immense suffering. Many individuals spend years believing they're searching for love, when in reality they're searching for resolution. This insight also helps explain why healthy relationship can initially feel surprisingly uncomfortable. A reliable partner may seem boring. An emotionally available person may fail to create the same spark. Consistency can feel unfamiliar when unpredictability shape your earliest experiences of connection. The nervous system does not automatically recognize health as attractive. First, it recognizes what is familiar, and familiarity is often mistaken for chemistry. This realization can be unsettling because it forces us to question our strongest attractions. We like to believe that intense emotions reveal profound compatibility, yet intensity and compatibility are not the same thing. A powerful emotional reaction may indicate genuine connection, but it may also indicate the activation of an old wound. Just because your feelings for the other person are extremely intense, this does not mean that you should actually be with them. The strongest attraction in your life is not necessarily pointing towards your future. Sometimes it is pointing towards your past. And healing begins when we become curious about this distinction. Instead of asking, why do I want this person so badly? We begin asking a deeper question. What emotional experiences does this person awaken in me? The answer is often far more revealing than anything we could learn about the person themselves. Because sometimes what feels like destiny is familiarity. Sometimes what feels like chemistry is recognition. Sometimes what feels like love is an old wound desperately hoping for a different ending. I like to say that falling in love is the unconscious mind's attempt to finally understand our certain pain or to answer a question, to solve a problem, or to bring a story to a close. I hope you've learned something new today. In the next video, we explore why we fall in love through the lens of attachment and attachment wounds. Subscribe so you don't miss out, and I will see you very, very soon.